In January 2026, 3 specialists examined a sealed bundle of papyrus taken from the wrappings of a 1,600-year-old Egyptian mummy. They expected the kind of words archaeologists had found in similar bundles before: a spell, a prayer, or instructions meant to protect the dead. Instead, the faded Greek letters began naming places, commanders, and ships. The text was not Egyptian magic. It was Homer. More precisely, it was part of Book 2 of the Iliad, the Catalogue of Ships, the ancient roll call of warriors sailing toward Troy. Someone had laid that passage across a dead man's abdomen, wrapped it into his mummy, and sent it into the darkness. No inscription explains why, but the passage itself may be the most haunting clue. The discovery began months earlier, between November and December 2025, at Al-Bahnasa in Middle Egypt, the site of ancient Oxyrhynchus. A team from the University of Barcelona was working in Tomb 65 of Sector 22 when it uncovered a Roman-era mummy inside a complex of 3 limestone burial chambers. The tomb had suffered from ancient looting. Wooden coffins and other burials were damaged. Yet beneath the mummy's wrappings, over the area between the chest and abdomen, one fragile object had survived: a folded packet of papyrus, deliberately placed during embalming. Some headlines later said the Iliad had been found inside the mummy's stomach or organs. That is not quite what the evidence shows. The papyrus was placed on top of the body and incorporated beneath the wrappings. It was hidden inside the mummy as a funerary package, not stuffed into the internal organs. That correction makes the discovery no less strange. An embalmer still had to choose the packet, position it over the torso, seal it, and cover it so completely that it remained beside the dead for 16 centuries. The excavators already knew that papyri sometimes appeared in this position. Earlier campaigns at Oxyrhynchus had uncovered bundled and sealed Greek texts placed on mummified bodies. Those texts were mainly magical or ritual. Their presence made sense within a burial. Words could guard the deceased, invoke divine power, or help the soul move through dangers beyond death. But the new packet contained literature. According to the University of Barcelona, this is the first known Greek literary text deliberately incorporated into the Egyptian mummification process. During the January and February 2026 research campaign, conservator Margalita Muner, papyrologist Leah Maschia, and classical philologist Ignacy Xavier Adiego studied the fragment. Maschia read enough of the damaged Greek to reveal its pattern. Adiego recognized the passage. It belonged to the Catalogue of Ships in Book 2 of Homer's Iliad, one of the most famous and unusual sections of the poem. The identification transformed the mummy from another damaged Roman period burial into a mystery connecting Egypt, Greece, literature, education, magic, and death. To understand why that matters, we have to enter the world in which the mummy lived. Around 1600 years ago, Egypt had already passed through enormous changes. Pharaohs had ruled for millennia. Alexander the Great conquered the country in 332 BCE. A Greek-speaking dynasty followed. Rome absorbed Egypt after the death of Cleopatra. By the late Roman period, Greek remained central to administration and education. Christianity was expanding. Older Egyptian religious practices had not vanished, and communities blended traditions that modern labels often separate too neatly. Oxyrhynchus stood inside that blended world. Its Greek name meant the city of the sharp-nosed fish, after a fish sacred in local Egyptian tradition. The city lay beside the Bar Yusuf waterway, roughly 190 kilometers south of Cairo. In the Roman era, it was a prosperous provincial center with temples, colonnaded streets, government offices, schools, workshops, farms, markets, and a theater large enough for thousands of spectators. Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and later Christian life overlapped there for generations. The city became famous for modern scholarship for a different reason: rubbish. Beginning in 1896, Oxford archaeologists Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt excavated ancient refuse mounds preserved by the dry climate. They found private letters, tax records, contracts, school exercises, shopping lists, petitions, poems, plays, religious writings, and lost works by famous authors. Oxyrhynchus eventually produced the largest collection of papyri of its kind in the world. It preserved not only what elites carved in stone, but what ordinary people wrote, copied, studied, paid, argued over, and threw away. Homer appeared everywhere in that paper world. The Iliad and Odyssey were not museum pieces. They were foundations of Greek education. Children copied lines to practice writing. Teachers used Homer to explain vocabulary, grammar, history, morality, and mythology. Educated adults quoted the poems. Scholars compared versions. Performers recited them. A person who could read Greek in Roman Egypt was likely to know Homer, even if they never owned a complete copy. That makes the discovery both less surprising and more mysterious. A fragment of the Iliad at Oxyrhynchus is normal. A fragment of the Iliad sealed into a mummy is not. The Catalogue of Ships was not an accidental footnote in ancient education. It was one of the sections through which listeners imagined the entire Greek world assembled in a single story. The poem moves from region to region, naming rulers and communities. then attaching ships to each contingent. The list turns distant geography into a shared memory of war. For students, it offered difficult names and traditional places to learn. For scholars, it preserved arguments about early Greece. For audiences, it created scale. Troy was not being approached by one hero, but by a world in motion. That scale may explain why the fragment carried authority far from the Aegean. Homer's poems had traveled through recitation, handwritten copies, schools, libraries, and private collections for centuries before this mummy was prepared. Every copy was made by hand. Scribes introduced changes, corrected mistakes, added marks, and followed different layouts. The Oxyrhynchus fragment is therefore not merely a quotation from a famous modern book. It belongs to the long physical history through which the Iliad survived. Thousands of ancient copies vanished. Papyrus tears, burns, rots in damp soil, and can be washed clean for reuse. Complete literary rolls were especially vulnerable because they demanded storage and care. What survives is often fragmentary. One column, a torn margin, several words, or a page reused for another task. Scholars reconstruct the ancient text by comparing those pieces with medieval manuscripts written many centuries later. A small Egyptian fragment can preserve a spelling, line order, or reading that helps reveal how the poem traveled through time. The newly discovered packet may eventually contribute to that work, although its funerary context is currently more important than any reported textual difference. Researchers have not announced a lost episode, unknown hero, or a radically different version of the catalog. The power of the discovery comes from where the words were found, not from a sensational change to Homer's story. That distinction matters. Viral retellings can easily transform a genuine discovery into a false one. The mummy did not contain the entire Iliad. Archaeologists did not find a complete hidden book inside an untouched pharaoh. The burial was late Roman, more than 1,000 years after the age traditionally associated with Homer, and far later than Egypt's pyramid-building kingdoms. What survived was a fragment folded and incorporated into the wrappings of one adult mummy at Oxyrhynchus. Yet a fragment can be more intimate than a complete library. A library tells us what a society preserved. This packet tells us that someone carried a specific piece of literature into a funeral. The missing pages make the choice harder to explain. Was the surviving passage selected because of its meaning, or was it simply the portion available when the packet was made? Until the entire object is conserved and published, even that basic question remains open. The folds may preserve the order in which the sheet was handled, while residue from clay, resin, linen, or sealing material could reveal whether it was prepared in the embalming workshop or arrived there already packaged beforehand. The exact section deepens the puzzle. The Catalogue of Ships comes after the Greek army gathers for war. Homer pauses the action and names the contingents sailing toward Troy, their leaders, homelands, peoples, and numbers of ships. To a modern reader, the long list can feel like a delay before the battle. To ancient audiences, it carried memory. It transformed a mass of soldiers into communities. Each place named in the poem sent men across the sea. Each ship represented homes left behind. The catalogue was a map of departure. The mummy was also beginning a journey. That parallel has led to the most powerful interpretation. Perhaps the papyrus acted as a protective text, not because the Iliad was normally a spell, but because this particular passage described an organized crossing. The Greek fleet assembled, leaders were named, and ships moved toward a distant shore. Placed over a corpse, the words may have been transformed into a guide, escort, or symbol for the dead person's passage into another world. The surviving fragment contains no note saying, "Use this poem as a funerary charm." We do not know whether the embalmer understood every line, whether the family selected the passage, or whether the packet had already been prepared for another purpose. A second possibility is personal identity. The dead man may have been educated in Greek. He may have been a teacher, student, scribe, official, reader, performer, or simply someone whose family associated him with Homer. The fragment could have come from a school text or a treasured book. Placing it on his body may have been like burying a modern reader with a page from the work that shaped his life. If so, the papyrus was not a general charm. It was a memory of the person under the wrappings. The problem is that almost nothing about his life has yet been made public. Researchers have described the mummy as an adult male, but the investigation is continuing. No name has been linked to him. No biography survives. We do not know his occupation, language at home, religion, family status, or reason for burial in Tomb 65. A literary text can suggest literacy or cultural connection, but it cannot prove that the deceased personally read it. The family or embalmer may have chosen it instead. A third explanation is far less romantic: recycling. Papyrus was valuable enough to be reused. Old accounts, letters, school exercises, damaged books, and documents could become wrapping, padding, cartonnage, or raw material. A torn Iliad may have been available in the embalming workshop, because nobody considered that particular sheet worth preserving. The famous poem might have entered the grave not as sacred literature, but as convenient paper. Yet recycling does not solve everything. The packet was folded, sealed, and deliberately positioned. Other packages in similar places contained magical texts. That pattern suggests ritual intention, even if the material itself was reused. An embalmer could take an old literary page and give it a new magical purpose. In antiquity, the boundary between literature and spell was not always fixed. Words gained power from context, reputation, sound, divine names, heroic associations, and the action performed around them. A fourth possibility combines education and magic. Homer's language was ancient even to the people of Roman Egypt. The poems carried extraordinary cultural authority. Lines from Homer could be quoted like wisdom, used in divination, or treated as more than entertainment. A family might believe that words known across the Greek-speaking world possessed protective force, especially when sealed and placed against the body. The Iliad did not need to be written as a spell to become one. This practice has a name in later scholarship, Homeromantein, or Homeric divination, in which lines of Homer could be consulted for answers. Different surviving texts show that Homeric verses could move beyond classroom and performance into ritual use, but the Oxyrhynchus mummy does not automatically belong to that practice. The papyrus has been identified as a literary fragment, not a divination manual. The connection only demonstrates that ancient readers could use Homer in ways modern categories do not expect. There is also a darker possibility inside the chosen passage. The Catalogue of Ships names men before many of them die. It remembers them at the moment they are still organized, alive, and moving together. A funerary reader may have heard not only travel, but the approach of death. The list turns geography into mourning. Cities send sons who will not all return. A dead man in Egypt was wrapped with a text that preserved the names of forces marching toward their fate. Was that symbolism intentional? Margins, corrections, punctuation, and writing on the reverse can show how the sheet was used before burial. Ink analysis may clarify its production. The seal, folds, and physical relationship to the mummy can show whether it was prepared as a ritual packet or merely trapped among wrappings. But studying the fragment is difficult. Papyrus becomes brittle after centuries. Unfolding a sealed packet can destroy fibers and erase the relationship between layers. Conservators must stabilize it before scholars can safely read every surviving letter. Photography, under different wavelengths, may reveal ink invisible to the naked eye. Digital reconstruction may help align broken pieces. The first announcement identified the text, but the full scholarly publication and conservation study are still to come. The mummy may also speak through methods that do not require unwrapping. CT scans can reveal age, sex, injuries, dental condition, amulets, packing materials, and embalming techniques. Radiocarbon dating could narrow the chronology. Isotope analysis might suggest where the man grew up or what he ate. Ancient DNA, if preserved, could add biological information, although Egypt's heat and later handling often damaged genetic material. None of these methods can recover his thoughts, but together they may reduce the distance between a body and a person. The tomb context matters just as much. Tomb 65 contained 3 limestone chambers with Roman-era mummies and decorated wooden sarcophagi, many damaged by looting. The position of each body, surviving objects, inscriptions, pigments, and construction phases may show whether the burials belong to one family, community, or period. If other papyrus packets appear, researchers can compare their texts and placements. One Iliad fragment is an anomaly. A pattern would become a ritual tradition. The find also forces us to rethink the phrase Roman Egypt. The mummy was Egyptian because he was buried in Egypt and mummified within a tradition rooted there. The text was Greek, the political world was Roman, the burial may have occurred while Christianity was spreading. These identities did not cancel one another. A single person could speak Greek, honor Egyptian customs, live under Roman government, and participate in beliefs that borrowed from several worlds. Modern audiences often imagine ancient cultures as sealed rooms, Egyptians with hieroglyphs and the Book of the Dead, Greeks with Homer, Romans with Latin, Christians with Scripture. Oxyrhynchus breaks those walls. Its papyri preserve classical poetry beside tax disputes, magical formulas beside Christian gospels, official orders beside private grief. A text could begin as literature, become a school copy, pass into a household, tear, lose value, enter a ritual workshop, and finally be sealed with the dead. Its meaning changed at every stage. The fragment survived, not because someone built a library around it, but because someone made it impossible to separate from a corpse. That is the strange reversal at the heart of the discovery. The mummy preserved the poem, but the poem may also have been expected to preserve the mummy's owner in another sense. One protected the other across 16 centuries. The man's name vanished. Homer's words remained. Yet without the nameless man, those particular words might have decayed, burned, or been thrown into a dump. The choice of Homer also raises a question about status. Books required materials, labor, and literacy. But by the late Roman period, fragments circulated widely, and a single reused sheet did not necessarily indicate wealth. The decorated coffins and tomb construction may suggest investment in burial, but looting and incomplete publication make social rank difficult to judge. It is tempting to call the man an elite scholar. The evidence does not yet allow it, nor does the find prove that Egyptians believed the Trojan War literally happened. A text can be powerful without being treated as history. The Iliad offered models of courage, anger, loyalty, loss, divine interference, and mortality. Its heroes knew that glory could outlive the body, but the poem also showed the cost of that hope. In a burial, those themes could speak more strongly than any geographical claim about Troy. Book 2 is especially concerned with memory and order. Before battle scatters bodies, the poet gathers names. Before death makes men anonymous, the catalogue places them inside communities. That may be why the fragment feels so perfectly chosen, even if chance selected it. The person in Tomb 65 is almost anonymous to us. The text covering him comes from a passage designed to resist anonymity. A list of names survived on a man whose name did not. This contrast gives the discovery its emotional power. Archaeology often recovers kings, because kings carved their names into stone. Ordinary people survive through accidents: a letter in a rubbish heap, a sandal in dry sand, a fingerprint in clay, or a papyrus trapped beneath bandages. The Iliad mummy may never become identifiable, but one decision made during his funeral has carried a fragment of that ceremony into the present. Picture the embalming room. The body has been prepared. Linen waits, resin, oils, tools, and packets are nearby. Someone chooses a folded papyrus. Perhaps the family has brought it. Perhaps it has been copied for this purpose. Perhaps it is an old page. Sand and darkness finish the work of preservation. Then, 1600 years later, the packet is read again. The words still describe ships preparing to cross the sea. That final image explains why no single interpretation can yet be accepted. The passage fits too many meanings. It could represent travel to the afterlife. It could summon protection through famous words. It could honor the education or identity of the deceased. It could have been reused because it was available. It could do several of those things at once. Ancient rituals were not required to choose between practical material, personal memory, and magical symbolism. The strongest conclusion is also the most careful one. Archaeologists know that the papyrus was deliberately incorporated into the mummy's wrappings. They know it contains part of the Catalogue of Ships from Book 2 of the Iliad. They know similar funerary packets at Oxyrhynchus usually contained magical or ritual texts. They do not yet know why this literary fragment was selected, what it meant to the mourners, or whether the deceased had any personal connection to Homer. And that uncertainty is not a weakness, it is a mystery. The discovery does not reveal a secret lost chapter of the Iliad. It does not prove Homer was an Egyptian priest, and it does not show that the mummy was a Greek warrior. It reveals something more believable and more human. People in late Roman Egypt could take the most famous literature of the Greek world and place it inside an Egyptian act of burial, giving old words a new purpose at the edge of death. The man beneath the wrappings may have known the poem by heart. He may have heard it in school as a child. He may never have read it at all. But when his body was prepared for its final journey, someone chose a passage in which an army gathers beside the sea, every homeland is remembered, and hundreds of ships wait to leave. The fleet sailed toward Troy. The mummy sailed into eternity. Only one of them returned carrying the names of the dead.